Since the end of World War II, immigration has always been a hot topic for Britain. It is regularly given a prominent position in party manifestos, in our newspapers, on TV talk show panels and across social media. It tops opinion polls as one of our greatest concerns, and it can even be argued that it was a key factor in one of Britain's largest historical democratic exercises to date, our decision to leave the European Union. I'm regularly told by the mainstream media, and certain progressive types, that immigration is great for Britain. Diversity is our strength, they say. Think of the incredible range of restaurants it brings. Islam? Well, that's a religion of peace, and this is nothing new because we've always been a nation of immigrants anyway. Cheddar Man was black, don't you know? It's interesting because I happen to know that we haven't always been a nation of immigrants. Britain was pretty much homogenous right up until Empire Windrush docked in Tilbury in 1948. I also happen to know that opinion polls show that the British have always overwhelmingly been against mass immigration, right from Empire Windrush to the present day. We've always wanted a reduction in immigration levels, even during times when immigration levels were low. Could it be that the mainstream media aren't telling the truth? And what kind of an impact is immigration having on Britain today? Britain is currently going through a transformation unlike anything we've seen before. Every 10 years, our government collects a census which gives a breakdown of the UK's population. The last census came out in 2011 and it revealed that the UK was 87% white and just under 82% white British. Now those figures aren't too low, but the issue is just how quickly those figures are changing and where those figures are heading. The percentage of white or white British people in the UK had dropped by around 4 to 5% since the census before. If we look at just England, then the percentage of white British people had dropped by around 7% since the census before. By the 2021 census, demographers predict that those figures will have dropped by another 5 to 10%. What will these figures look like in 2031 and beyond? It was also revealed in the 2011 census that the white British are a minority, so less than 50% of the population, in our capital city, London, and also in Leicester, Luton and Slough. So why is this happening? Why are we becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the population? There are two reasons. The first is obviously immigration, and if you look at our official government records, you will see that hundreds of thousands of new people are coming to Britain every single year. The second reason is our disproportionate fertility rates, so the number of children that different groups are having. In a first world country like Britain, an overall fertility rate of 2.1 children per woman is required for a population to stay the same size. It's slightly over 2 children per woman or couple to counter things like mortality rates and the fact that not the exact same amount of boys and girls are born. In 2019, Britain currently has an overall fertility rate of around 1.8 children per woman, and it's very different depending on which ethnic group you look at. Obviously, if certain groups are outbreeding other groups within Britain, and on top of this, hundreds of thousands of new people are coming here every single year, then we're going to end up becoming a smaller and smaller percentage of the population. So where is this heading, and how fast? The first set of figures that we can look at are the percentage of pupils from minority ethnic origins in state-funded primary and secondary schools. As we can see from these figures, around 1/3 of children are from minority ethnic origins. This figure is increasing by around 1% per year. The second set of figures that we can look for are live births by ethnic group. In 2018, only 58% of live births were categorised as being white British. Once again, this figure is dropping by around 1% per year. If current trends continue, by the year 2027, white British babies will be a minority. Looking at school figures and births by ethnic group are a great way to predict what our future will be like because Britain's children are Britain's future. Experts in the area of demography, including Professor David Coleman, the Professor of Demography at the University of Oxford, have used mathematical equations to advise that, if things carry on as they are, then the white British will be a minority in Britain, so less than 50% of the overall population, by or before the year 2066. That's only a few decades away. Obviously, this will have huge implications for the native British. I personally believe that this is the single largest issue that we face today, and I wholeheartedly do not want it to happen. And the thing that gets me is, we were never asked. We were never asked if we wanted to become a minority in our own country. We were never asked if we wanted our country to change so dramatically. But am I alone in my thinking, or do the majority of Britons agree with me? We have no evidence because a survey on the topic of us becoming a minority in Britain has never been carried out. Until now. Myself and a group of volunteers decided that the real, honest opinions and concerns and desires of the British will be heard. So we decided to hit the streets and ask them ourselves. Our aim was to find out how the British feel about our changing demographics and the British becoming a minority in Britain. And so our project We Were Never Asked was launched. On Saturday the 24th of August 2019, 40 to 50 patriots hit the streets to survey the British public on their thoughts on our changing demographics. In groups of 2 to 6 we visited cities across the country including London, Coventry, Manchester and Leeds. Wearing high-vis vests and carrying clipboards and our professionally printed surveys, we approached random members of the public and asked if they could spare a couple of minutes to answer a short selection of questions. We did not approach the public as nationalists as we did not want to influence their answers. Instead, we approached people as data collection volunteers, and we let the public make up their own mind without trying to impact the answers. It was always important to us that the results that we received were a true reflection of public opinion. The first part of the survey involved asking 3 questions about the respondents' personal details, namely gender, age and ethnic group. Even though we only wanted to survey the white British, we had to ask the ethnic group question as we could not assume that somebody was white British without their confirmation. In total, we surveyed 2,022 people who identified as being white British. There was a selection of people from other ethnic groups who completed the survey, but their results have not been included in our project. With regards to gender, we surveyed 1,002 people who identified as male and 1,020 people who identified as female. With regards to age, we surveyed a fair representation across the age spectrum. The percentages of each age group are shown on the screen now. 2.97% of people were marked down as prefer not to say. After collecting these answers, we then moved on to the 2 most important questions. Question 1 involved asking the public if they were aware of our changing demographics, and question 2 involved asking the public how they felt about it. Question 1 involved asking the respondent about whether they were aware of our changing demographics. Before asking this question, we read out the following sentences. Based on current demographic trends, population experts predict white Britons could be a minority in Britain by 2060. White Britons are already a minority in London. We then showed the respondent 3 newspaper articles which are being shown on the screen now and which reported on our changing demographics. We chose a variety of articles including the left-leaning Guardian, the centre-right-leaning Daily Mail and the local newspaper, the London Evening Standard. We then asked the question, are you aware that these demographic changes are taking place? The respondent could choose between yes and no. Please note that the results may not always add up to exactly 100% as we have rounded the answers to the nearest 2 decimal places. In total, approximately 2/3 of people said that they were aware that these demographic changes are taking place. 67.41% of people said yes, to be exact. 32.3% of people said that they were not aware that these changes are taking place, and 0.3% of people were marked as prefer not to say. Females were slightly more likely than men to say that they're aware of the changes, but only by a couple of percent. For question 1, there was not much of a difference in how males and females answered. There is a larger difference if we look at the results by age, however. People who identified as being aged 30 plus were more likely to answer yes than people aged between 0 and 29. The results by age can be seen on the screen now. Question 2 involved us asking the respondents their opinion on our changing demographics. The question was asked as follows. How do you feel about the fact that white Britons are already a minority in London and are likely to be a minority across the whole of Britain by 2060? The respondents could choose between 3 answers. I feel that white Britons becoming a minority in Britain is a good thing. I feel that white Britons becoming a minority in Britain is a bad thing. And I have no strong feelings on the issue of demographic change. The results were as follows. Over 2/3, so 68.5% of respondents answered that they believe it is a bad thing. Only 4.8% of respondents answered that they believe it is a good thing. And 26.26% of respondents said that they had no strong feelings. If we break the results down by gender, the results are rather interesting. For both genders, the number of people answering that it's a good thing is pretty similar, under 5% in both cases. However, males are more likely to say that it's a bad thing, whereas females are more likely to sit on the fence and say that they have no strong feelings. Still, the number of people saying that it's a bad thing is around 2/3 for females and 3/4 for males. These results are echoed if we break the results down by age. Once again, whether it's younger people or older people, only around 5% of respondents answered that they believe that it's a good thing. However, older people, so those aged 30 plus, are more likely to say that it's a bad thing, whereas those aged under 30 are more likely to answer no strong feelings. Still, over half of young people aged 0 to 29 said that they believed that it's a bad thing, while a whopping 71.03% of over 30s said that it's a bad thing. It's sometimes difficult to demonstrate through statistics why people may have answered the way that they did. With question 2 in particular, around a quarter of respondents answered that they have no strong feelings on the topic of demographic change. This is why we decided to include the next part of the documentary, which is snippets of interview that I carried out with a number of the volunteers from the day. For example, it's impossible to show through statistics alone that a number of the people that we surveyed appeared scared to answer question 2, or at least answer the question in a certain way. Bearing this in mind, we hope that what you are about to hear will allow you to delve a little deeper into the public consensus from the day. After the data collection activity, I carried out a number of interviews with volunteers from the day. The aim of this was to provide you with greater insight into why we got the results that we did, and also to provide the viewer with some more information about how the public really feel. As I have a good few hours worth of interview material, I have clipped certain parts from the interviews based on what I believe the viewer will find the most interesting.
Oh, I think there's definitely a pressure. People definitely feel a pressure to say that they're pro-immigration, that they're pro-multiculturalism. People clearly don't want to be judged as being racist. People are clearly scared of saying what they really think when it comes to issues of race, demographics, ethnicity, and multiculturalism. And I think that if it was a completely anonymous survey and they didn't have to look people in the eye when they were speaking to them, I think even more people would have said they were opposed to it. And people were clearly nervous to speak their mind, especially to people that they thought were a professional surveying company who you would imagine would be working for a newspaper, a television company, a government report, which when published might judge people like them harshly. And what you also have to remember is the white working class are probably the most maligned segment of our society. They're the only segment of our society that you can sort of mock, that you can deride, that you can pour scorn on without having kind of any form of social pushback for doing so. But those who did speak to us, you did have to keep reminding them this is completely anonymous. Everything you say to us is said in absolute confidence. And that kind of eased them into it, but they were still nervous to give their opinions. And what I noticed was, I think they thought that we were carrying out the survey because we were pro-multicultural and that we would actually be judging them harshly if they were honest with us. And I had several people say to me during the survey, well, what are your thoughts, mate? How do you feel about it? Come on, you can't think it's great for us just to be flooded with these people. And I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't give my opinion until, you've completed the survey. And if you want to discuss it further with me, you can. But I think we gave the impression that actually we were pro-multicultural, and that did scare some people. These survey companies, especially YouGov, are known for putting a pro-multicultural slant on any survey they do. And I think people are aware of that. They're nervous to talk about it, and they were nervous that we would judge them in a very negative way if they said that they felt that mass immigration was bad. And I think some of them were quite relieved when it was over. And they said, so what do you think, mate? And I said, well, actually, I think it's bad as well. And, I do agree with you. But obviously you can't say that beforehand because you don't want to influence their response to the survey.
Look around so much. But there was a few of the survey entries that when they got to the last question, it wasn't answered, or that was where there was a comment. So you weren't comfortable being drawn on that question. There was a handful of people that did indicate that it was a very uncomfortable question to ask, or that I think one guy said, oh, that's a bit racist. And a few other people, as soon as they knew the questions that we were asking, they decided, oh, I'd rather not, and carried on with the day. And these are mostly white British people of some description. So I think there was a level of apprehension that was quite obvious to me.
There was also one more really interesting one. It was a young girl who, she was so uncomfortable with me. I mean, I did sort of stop her on the street, and I didn't look very professional. I hope that didn't make too much difference, but I was very friendly, and I said, look, whatever you think, you're just welcome to say it. And she said, well, I don't think it is happening. She was sort of going on like that for a little bit. And I said, well, how about just imagine if it was happening, would that be a good thing? And then she just got so uncomfortable. She said, I don't think I want to answer this. And she wouldn't even give me the survey back.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's weird, really, really weird. But I do see how it's happened. I think it's you just see how visibly uncomfortable a lot of people are even discussing it. Either that, or they're in the other camp and they're quite happy to talk about it. But the ones that aren't aware, you can feel that they just seem to me to be totally uncomfortable with even discussing it. Which I think is a real thing. I don't know about you. Like, I think, people are, with good reason a lot of the time, just they've had the fear of God put into them to even discuss things like this. Yeah, I would say the ones that said that they don't have an opinion were just nervous. You can feel it as soon as they start reading the questions. They know they're talking about a taboo subject. You can just kind of feel it, but then I can't prove that to anyone,
I just think they felt kind of scared to answer the question. I think they felt that they weren't allowed to say it. It was, and you then quickly moved away. That's the way it came across for me.
Do you think that there would have been more people saying that it was a bad thing if they weren't scared of the implications afterwards?
I think there certainly would have been a few. Let's put it that way. No doubt. There would have been a few.
Yeah, I got the same impression, because some people kind of paused and looked at me and they weren't sure how to answer, and it was like they were asking my permission to be able to speak freely. We just reached out.
Exactly
said,
right.
Completely
That's
anonymous.
Exactly right. Yeah, they're just too scared to give an answer in some cases. And it's the programming that runs deep, isn't it, within them? In their workplaces, it's probably the same kind of rules that they have to follow. The same, unable to open up. It's So
I mean, people, before they would say that it was a bad thing, they would either look behind or hesitate, or looked to me for sort of permission to say what they really believed. So, you know, it's kind of as I expected. You know, people were just so scared to say their true feelings on these topics because they've been told they're not allowed.
Yeah, I had a few people as well that when I asked that final question, they kind of looked at me like, what am I supposed to say? And I was like, just say whatever you want. It doesn't matter, you know, it's completely anonymous. But everyone that I've spoke to, including Mark, we all had people who were a little bit too scared to answer. So I wonder how many of the people that said that they had no strong feelings, I wonder if really they did actually have an opinion, but they were a little bit too scared to answer. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. The surveys like this, where you're face to face with people, are difficult because you can't know whether the data is totally accurate, because very often people are keen to fit in, and they don't want to get into a conflict on the street. I was particularly careful to choose people on their own, so it would be as private as possible. I certainly didn't approach people in pairs. So, but even with the one-on-one situation, they sort of hesitated and weren't sure if they were comfortable with me. A lot of people actually thought we were leftists doing the survey. So, yeah, a project like this is difficult.
Yeah, I think that's why us getting 7 out of 10 people is, I just find so white pilling, because that's 7 out of 10 people that had the balls to say, I don't want to become a minority. And then the other people, I reckon quite a few of them probably felt the same too.
Oh, I did. I got plenty of people talking about how the town had changed, people talking about how they wanted immigrants to go back to their land of origin. And once people opened up and started to speak their mind, I found what they were saying was very, very similar to what people said to me when I was doing the Brexit stalls. At first, people were nervous. At first, people were looking over their shoulders. But once people started to actually open up, once people realized they could speak freely to you and that you weren't going to judge them and you were there to listen and were probably on their side, they really did start to say things which were highly critical of the government, of the current immigration system, and of multiculturalism as a whole.
Yeah, she was quite concerned. She wasn't too fully aware of all the data and issues and numbers, but she was aware that, you know, she could see what was going on, and she could see, like, you know, various places in all around Greater Manchester. You know, a lot of the churches have been taken over. There's various, you know, I mean, I'm sure people are familiar with the situation. That's what she could see in front of her in everyday life, what she was concerned about. And she was there with the kids going to town. And it's like she was there in the moment, in the middle of it all, going, yeah, this is a little bit much, kind of thing. She wasn't too scared, but she was kind of a bit worried that stuff's really changing quite quickly, and
you know, the majority. The most interesting situation that I came across was a guy in his kind of mid-20s. And I asked him the survey, and then he really opened up afterwards, and he wanted to discuss it with me further. He was telling me he was from a racially segregated area in Bolton, and yeah, he really wanted to carry on the conversation. It made him frustrated. It made him angry that he has to live in this divided place. And yeah, these were his words. You know, it's fine at school when we all integrated, but now we hate each other. It just doesn't work. You know, there's a dividing line through the community. So yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, so there was an 18-year-old lad. He was sort of going to the bus stop, and I stopped him and said, "Would you mind doing it?" And immediately he sort of said, "What? We're going to be a minority in 40 years?" And I said, "Yeah, white people aren't having enough children, and mass immigration is happening." And he just couldn't get his head around it. It was like, I'm not racist. I love multiculturalism, but we're the English. What about identity? I think identity is really important. And I was like, yeah, I'm an identitarian. I agree with you. And it was quite surprising to hear those words from someone that was totally oblivious to the political scene. He literally just he realized how important identity was without being prompted. And he said, "Oh, you've ruined my day now." And I said, "Well, sorry, but you know, it's something we have to live with and work to correct."
They didn't sound off and go bananas on us, but there was a couple that were really angry together about what's happening, and they were totally aware. So there's much more. The ones that say yes, they're not happy with it, they're not happy about it. They're totally aware, because I suppose it's partly personality as well, isn't it?
I remember when I'd finished my packet of surveys and I walked over to you and you were speaking to a young woman and you asked her the last question and then she went, "Oh no, sorry, I'm not interested. I don't want any of them here." And then she walked off. So she thought you were pro-immigration.
Yeah, she seemed really angry about it. When I told her, I think that she was very shocked. She was one of the people who didn't actually know it was going on, and I had to explain it to her. She said, "Oh, well, what's demographic change?" I said, "Well, it's the changing makeup of the UK." And she said, "Well, what are you saying?" I said, "Well, I'm saying that white people that look like you, will be a minority by 2060, according to the data that we've been presented." And when I said that, she was absolutely appalled. She head up in the air and walked off angrily, as if I was advocating for that. And I think that was another thing I noticed amongst young women like that. They were clearly quite angry, and you could probably correlate that to the fact that they are young mothers and they want to protect their children. They don't want to see their children become a minority.
I think that the people that might have been indifferent, I think they did often enter into why they were indifferent, and I do remember quite a chunk of them sort of thinking, well, there's not much we can do now. It's already had an effect here, and not people that might know the situation as much as people like us doing surveys and doing the nationalist activity. But yeah, there's a bit of that antipathy, I think it is. They were just like, yeah, it's happened, it's happening. It's not so much of a bad thing, really, is it? Let's just carry on, kind of a bit resigned to it. I think really there was a big chunk of that kind of feeling, like, but again, not really understanding the people's opinions at a deeper level. It's quite easy to think that's people just thinking that, but yeah.
So did you say that you had people who responded by saying, "I have no strong feelings, but it's only because we can't do anything about it," and they seemed a bit defeated?
Yeah, exactly. There was an air of defeat in their voices. Que sera, what will be, will be. Like one of the ladies actually said that. And I guess it's because they've been told to do anything else would make them a racist or a Nazi, blah, blah, blah. So there were definitely a few people like that.
The other thing I noticed was interesting enough, that a large portion of people who had no strong opinion, and this is reflected also in what Mark Collette said. He came across people who were older people who kind of sadly said, well, there's on the one hand that that they didn't have any strong opinions, so I clicked what they wanted, and then they said they're going to be dead anyway. And I thought, well, you're not really endorsing the future, are you? And you're not actually saying, I mean, that I was almost inclined to say, well, then let's say it's a bad thing. Then, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're endorsing
I
the future if you're going to then add that after you've just insisted no strong feelings.
Yeah, everyone that I've spoken to, so far I've spoken to Mark, you, and two other guys, and I had it as well. We all five of us had people saying no strong feelings because we're not going to be here, or we can't do anything about it. So it's almost like you want to tick the bad box because they are saying it's a bad thing, but you can't. You've just got to go with what they've said. So that's a trend. It's apathy, really, isn't it? A lot of people seem to have just given up. Yeah, it is sad. Yeah.
The people who are retired didn't, you had the two groups, the ones that are given up on talking about this sort of thing, and it's going to happen, nothing I can do about it. And then the people who were angry about it because they have a sense of nationhood that can be generational.
I did. One thing, again, this really interested me because the people that gave the no strong feelings or weren't bothered about it tended to be older people, which shocked me. I thought when I spoke to people, I had this kind of preconception that older people they would be aware of it. And if they weren't aware of it, they would be sort of quite appalled by it, and that they would be the people who said that it was a bad thing, that it would be, say, elderly gentleman was like, yep, I saw this happening, I've seen my town change over the years, and I think it's a bad thing. But something I heard repeatedly from older men was that they knew it was happening, and in their words, they would be dead soon, that they weren't going to be here much longer, so it wasn't something that really concerned them. And I thought that was a really sort of short-termist outlook. They weren't talking about what their children or their grandchildren might see. They were just saying that, well, I'm not going to be around for much longer, so it won't affect me. And that's something I simply did not expect to hear.
Though I did have a couple of people who did say it was a good thing, the people who said it generally it was a good thing weren't able to express why. That was the thing that struck me. They didn't know how to express it. Just so when you mentioned earlier that people feel they've got to say a certain thing, and that it's not necessarily what they think.
Yeah.
And I think it can be telling when, and this is where the qualitative look into all this is interesting psychologically, that they couldn't express why. It's like it's someone else's opinion. If it was their own opinion, they could probably express themselves better, but they couldn't do it.
The sort of most depressing one, I thought, was I stopped a couple and they were playing with, this was in a park, and they were playing with their kids. And I said, really, really sorry to interrupt you. I'm just pouncing on people because I need to get this survey done. Would you mind? And I stayed well away from them to sort of make sure that they knew it was all anonymous. I explained it was all anonymous and they can put it wherever they want to. And they also put, I think they put didn't know it was happening, but don't have any strong feelings about it. And they had two little kids with them. They had two little kids playing around with the park. And I just thought that was really depressing. And another one was an older lady walking along with who I assume was her granddaughter, about 25. They also both said they didn't really have an opinion on it. And I thought, oh, that's your granddaughter. Like, how can you not? It's her future you're talking about. So yeah, it was pretty much women that said, yeah, it's a good thing. One was a 20-year-old girl. She was with her dad, and he said he didn't have any strong opinion about it. She looked really pleased with herself when she gave me back the thing, and I thought I would have loved to, but I really thought that the idea was that we were trying to appear neutral and therefore not influence any opinions, and to genuinely get what people think about it. I mean, as much as I think they're all nuts, it's handy to know, isn't it? Like you do want to know if people genuinely think that.
I had one person say it was a good thing. She was kind of, firstly, it was a woman, and I'd expect that to be something that would come from a woman more than a man. She was quite overweight. She said it was a very good thing. She said that these people make Britain better, and it was time we opened our doors and let them all in. She seemed very enthusiastic about it, and she sort of glowed with happiness at the idea of the indigenous people becoming a minority. I think the really interesting thing is it shows that there's this absolutely huge divide between normal people and what normal people think, and between the political elite or the political class, and what the political class, the media, the establishment like to say is completely different to what normal people think or say in their own homes. And I think if you took MPs out onto the street, I think some of them would actually be shocked to what normal people actually think. And there is this absolute huge political divide, and people are talking now about it's the people versus Parliament, and they're talking about that in relation to Brexit. But I think it's the people versus Parliament on numerous issues, not just the issue of Brexit, but on plenty of issues, and immigration is one of them. And I would say immigration is probably one of the biggest dividing lines in society, and it was probably the main reason why people actually voted for Brexit.
Yeah, I think that, just imagine if this was done. Imagine if this survey was done like on a national scale in every, town and city and village across the UK with people from our movement that would be out there and just collating massive amounts of data. I think, and then for that to be put together and put in I know you're doing a fantastic job with probably a small documentary, but if it was then went viral online, or even if you got it in some kind of mainstream media program, it certainly, switched the mindset of the UK population, I believe.
Yeah. It would at least, I think other people would sit back and look at it and think, God, I think that.
Yeah.
And look at all these other people that think exactly the same way that I do.
Exactly. I think the same. And it's just so obvious, isn't it? It's just, yeah.
The results of this project demonstrate that the British public are overwhelmingly against our current and future demographic changes. The consensus is that an overall majority do not want to become a minority in Britain. In fact, only around 5% of British people agree with the way that things are going. This means that the immigration policies which previous governments have implemented and which our current government continue to maintain are being carried out against the wishes of the British public. We now have a piece of evidence that counters the lies of the mainstream narrative that teaches us that the majority of Britons want these levels of immigration. We don't. And know that any future actions of our representatives relating to immigration, except those that reverse these trends, are nothing short of acts of treason. We will no longer accept the desires of the majority being ignored so that the desires of the minority can be respected. I urge any viewers of this documentary who care for Britain and the British to share this information. I once again thank everybody who was involved in this project, and finally, I point you in the direction of our supporting website for those who wish to find out more. Thank you for listening.